Welcome back to another episode of The Art of Volunteering. Today we're going completely around the world. We're going to go to New Zealand. My new friend, Sue Griffin, is going to be talking about how she volunteers and how she wants to turn the world purple on October 24th. Sue, welcome.
Kia ora.
Very cool. We have another new friend to me, Sue Davoli, and she said to introduce when we got talking to say purple gin, and that just opened up everything when she said that.
Yes, purple gin. Purple gin is my project for the year for the Polio Day, which is World Polio Day, is October 24th. So,
So what do you do with purple gin? You want everyone to drink gin that's purple?
Well, that'd be good. No, the idea is the rest of the world, the whole world remembers polio on October 24th every year, and cities all around the world light up either an iconic structure of a sculpture or a building in purple. Buildings like the Burj Khalifa and the White House, Sydney Opera House, and unfortunately Aotearoa, or New Zealand, has been rather slack in doing this. We're only a small country. We've only got 5 million people, which we only reached recently, but we're still not been very good at it. So my job as a board member in Polio New Zealand is to correct that. So last year I managed to get 10 cities in New Zealand to light up something purple. It was either bridges or a nice building, something that was important to that city. And that worked really well, except I realised that when people see buildings lit in a particular colour, they don't always realise the significance of it. They just think, oh, that's a nice colour this week. So this year I want to make sure that people know what purple signifies. And what it signifies is the fact that those of us that survived polio feel quite strongly that we need to make sure it never comes back. So it's not a poor me sort of day. It's like to remind the world that we have to keep it at bay. So this year I'm trying to find ways to lead up to October 24th, making sure that people understand why it's purple. And purple signifies polio around the world because the volunteers and the polio vaccinators that do such a wonderful work in the third world countries around the world, they just try to vaccinate every child, which is with the liquid drips. And so when they have given one child a thing, they put their little pinky finger on an ink pad so the pinky gets purple. And that's how purple has come to signify polio. So in my efforts to try and find a way to bring it to the attention of perhaps younger generations, because, I'm well in my 70s and I'm one of the younger ones. So I want to make sure that people don't forget that polio caused such a problem similar to COVID. And the World Health Organization has said that if we don't keep it at bay, within 10 years we'll be back at 300,000 cases a year. And in fact, Papua New Guinea, which is only a plane ride away from us, it's only about 3 hours from New Zealand by plane. They had an outbreak a couple of years ago, and it's that close. So I'm trying to bring it to the younger ones. So I thought, what can I do to make the younger ones feel a bit more involved? So I thought, well, everybody likes to drink a bit. Most people do. So in England a couple of years ago came up. I have to say it's not my idea. England did this years ago, that they created a purple gin. So I went to one of the local, the wine and spirit store, which is where I buy my wine, and I said to him, look, if I can persuade some of the many distilleries in New Zealand to create a purple gin, because I think gin's quite an easy one to colour, and it's one that quite a lot of people probably drink. So I said, if I can persuade some distilleries to create a purple gin, would you have a promotional period, like a week or a month, where you have tastings and maybe experts, run a little class on how to select good gin and all this sort of thing. And they were very supportive. And so I written to at least 20 of the more than 100 gin distilleries in New Zealand, I'm ashamed to say. And have got a very positive response. And some of them are definitely they've agreed that they will be creating a purple gin. They say it's not a problem, and some of them are quite supportive, and some of them even want to donate a little bit per bottle to Polio New Zealand. So,
awesome.
so I now have sort of been a victim of my own success of this, because I didn't really envision it being quite so successful. So now I've got to create tasting events and media tie-ups and things like that. So I'll probably be creating some lunches, making people wear a purple hat or something stupid like that, and the wine shops doing these wine tastings, etc. So yeah, that's the story of the purple gin.
That's incredible. I love that journey. Now, you had mentioned you're a survivor of polio?
Yes, I had polio in 1949. Before, like most of the people that are in New Zealand anyway, because we have had a very good health system. Most of us contracted polio before vaccines were available. Vaccines only became created for polio in 1956, I think, 55, 56. So, most of us are fairly old. And most of our life, or most of my life, everyone's affected differently, but most of my life was pretty reasonable, actually. I limped, I had a bit of pain, and I limped and couldn't do some things, but life was normal. And I got married, I had children, I became a nurse, travelled around, and they discovered, however, that about up to 40 years after you recovered, it's sort of, they use the word comes back to kick you in the butt, but it doesn't really come back. It's just that when you first recovered, your body created a lot of defense mechanisms, ways for the paralyzed muscles to be stronger and get around things, and lots of different neurons that have sort of split themselves in half to cope where the other ones were destroyed. So 40 years later, it's not that it comes back, but these adaptions have worn away and can't survive anymore. So you end up having your back to being, sometimes some of us have ended back in braces and calipers. And I myself am quite lucky in that I don't, but I do have to use a wheelchair when I'm outside because I can't stand up for very long. So yeah, it's a bit of a thing. And the problem, of course, in New Zealand, we're a very sort of outdoorsy, strong people in New Zealand. And while we have an excellent health system, if you have an accident, even if you're a foreigner visiting New Zealand, you've got free health care if you fall over and break a hip or whatever. But if you dare to be sick because of a disease, then you don't get quite the same benefits. So because of that, Polio New Zealand has come into existence, and that we act as a support group for each other, and we raise funds. We have a very philanthropic family that assists us sometimes with funding. And, that's how
Is that the Duncan family? Is that the Duncan family? I read about them on your website.
Oh, okay. Yes. Wonderful family. Wonderful family there. They're farmers in the King Country. And many years ago, good 50 years ago at least, they split part of their farm off and used whatever profits came from that part, they put into a fund for polio. And this was done way back in the 40s and 50s when polio was around, because one of their farm workers' sons had polio. And they became very interested, and they've been a tremendous help to us as polio survivors. And they have now actually begun a foundation, the Duncan Foundation, which copes with, it focuses on other neuromuscular conditions, which is what polio is, because, without going on for hours, I can tell you how it works. But, a lot of people get polio and never get paralyzed, and that's just in the gut. But if it continues on into the bloodstream, goes through the spinal canal to the brain, is when you get the paralysis, etc. So it's considered a neuromuscular disease, as is multiple sclerosis and things like that.
Right. My uncle, he was in his 80s when he passed. He had polio, and it took out his arm. He had very little use of his arm.
Yeah.
So interesting. Let's see. You covered a lot of my questions.
Sorry, I didn't know how much to tell you.
No, that's awesome. I love it when you answer questions I haven't asked. So you are a polio survivor. How did you get involved with Polio New Zealand? Like, have you always been involved with it, or is this something you did after you retired? How did you get involved?
No, it was when polio came back and started to affect me. I was still living in Philadelphia at that time, and nobody, including the medical professionals, had any idea what the problem was. I was working in emergency room trauma centres, and I just had my pain was coming back to my legs like it had when I was younger, and I couldn't really do things. I was extremely tired, and I had my arm kept because I've had polio in one arm and one leg, so my arm kept jumping, and I went to a doctor, and unfortunately went to a very old doctor who was familiar with polio, and he helped me. And there is a man in USA. I think he lives in Trenton. No, I think he lives. Yeah, maybe he's in Trenton. He Richard Bruno, Dr. Richard Bruno, who himself had polio, but he has been a huge research resource for polio, and has written a very excellent book, which is very helpful. But at the time, I was working in the States as a nurse, and it got to the point I couldn't work anymore. I just couldn't cope with physical work. It's quite physical in specialty areas, and I couldn't actually. I have 3 sons, which I had with me in the States, and while they were older, they had become immovable, in that they had American girlfriends and went to university and married American girls, and I had choices to make. Did I go home where I could get taken care of, or did I and leave my children there, or what? So fortunately, I did have to come back to New Zealand. I couldn't survive in the American, no offence, but in the American health system, I wouldn't have survived. And so I came home to New Zealand, where we have free healthcare. And fortunately, 2 of my children followed me, so partial success. So when I got back here, I was still able to do things. I just wasn't able to do the nursing, and I did do some other things. But eventually I had to stop everything, and I searched for some support and some answers, and came across the Polio New Zealand Association. And eventually I've been involved with them, I suppose, for a good 15, 16 years, and am now a board member, and, as I said, responsible for the purples.
Purples. Excellent. How many people volunteer with Polio New Zealand? Just the board, or do you have other roles that are volunteer?
Well, it's a charitable organisation. It's listed as a charitable organisation, which of course, gives you benefits, not paying tax and all that sort of thing. But everyone on the board is a volunteer, and everybody in Polio New Zealand is a volunteer. We are a sort of self-supporting group. There's about 600 members And although not everybody is actively doing anything, if anyone's asked to do anything, there is no benefits or anything of doing it. So it is just volunteer.
Okay. Once people, is it not necessarily a passion, but is it like I want to say, they volunteer because it's personal to them and they want to see it continue?
Yes.
Yes.
Because one of the things that is a bit, without crying poor me, it's quite difficult having had polio. People today don't know what it is and they're not familiar with it. And we have quite a lot of things like idiosyncrasies in the way we move, things that other people might perceive as perhaps being rude, like it's difficult to stand up. Like, it's, everyone else stands up to give a toast to somebody perhaps and you can't stand up. It's difficult. You can't, and you have to explain why you walk the way you do. It's difficult. So one of the benefits of being in the Polio New Zealand is when we get together, which we, in regions, we get together quite regularly for coffees or lunches or something. It's almost like we have another family. It's like a polio family, we call it, because it's almost like a relief to get together with other people who have the same issues, because you don't have to explain yourself. And it's quite a unique feeling, really. So I think everybody that's in Polio New Zealand is invested in maintaining it as a viable group, which is always a bit of a concern, because apart from refugees coming in particular from the Malaysian and Asian countries, we don't have any more. We haven't had polio in New Zealand since I think we had 4 cases in 1963. But apart from that, we haven't had cases in New Zealand since 1956. But we do have refugees, which, we do take quite a few refugees. And at the moment, we're all helping a Cambodian woman who has been here, who had polio in Cambodia and, has got major problems. So it's not entirely gone in our memories here, but COVID has caused, I just keep saying to people, you mean COVID sort of has made people, or it should make people, remember how fragile we are as human beings. And unfortunately, there's quite a lot of, well, I didn't say there's a lot, there's a small percentage perhaps of non-believers, anti-vaxxers, and it is a concern that one day it will come back, because if you don't maintain saturation rate of at least 92%, I think it is, it stands a chance of getting back in.
And like you had said, it is kind of scary because you can have it and have no symptoms initially, right?
Well, correct. Correct. And recently, I think 3 years ago, because one of the things that is done in a proactive manner is wastewaters, probably most places in the world, I know we do here, wastewaters are tested regularly for various diseases, one of which is polio. And I think about 3 years ago, they've found the poliovirus present in the wastewater in Melbourne, for example. And I don't know I'll try and just quickly explain how that happens. When people can get polio, it actually goes into their gut. If it sits in their gut, they don't have any symptoms. They might feel like a flu. In fact, some people used to call it polio flu. You might feel those flu-like symptoms, but then it passes, and that virus will be excreted with the feces. So it can end up in the wastewater. It's when it goes past there, as I said before, into the blood system, that it becomes the big issue. So, and I don't think they realise particularly why the difference is, why some people it just sits in the gut and others it can progress. I guess it's the individual immunity levels and and predilections to various types of bacteria. But yeah, and this is why they concentrate the third world vaccination rates, because in countries where there's poor sanitation and maybe open sewage, this of course is where if everybody's not vaccinated, then one person can pick it up and so it will start off again.
And then it starts. Yeah. Wow.
I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
it does. It does. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm going to invite you to love on Polio New Zealand, what you love about it. And then if people want to get involved in the World Polio Day and wearing purple, where would they go to learn more about it? Just love on it.
Well, everywhere in the world, there's usually a polio association. United States has one, and they have quite a lot. In fact, because the March of Dimes, of course, was for polio. They have every year. They used to have the March of Dimes fundraising thing. That was creative. That March of Dimes was for polio. If you remember the original poster, it had a little boy wearing a couple of wearing calipers on both legs. Yeah. And Canada has a big one. I think Canada has one because one of the big issues with people that have recovered from polio, if they were in an iron lung, which a lot were, then you will also you've got things like respiratory problems, swallowing problems, sleep problems. So Canada has a big respiratory section for people that have survived being in the iron lungs. England has a big one, Ireland. I'm not sure about most of the European countries, but I'm pretty sure they do. And you can just go on to Google and just Google polio associations in your region, and I'm sure you'll come up with web pages. A really good one is Australia. Australia has a very structured polio group. I mean, they're a large country, and not like poor little New Zealand. We're very small. And they have an excellent website. So if you went into Polio Australia, you'll get all sorts of information. And also United Kingdom is really good. In fact, they're the ones that came up with the purple. Well, the Polio Association. I don't know if they came up with the purple gin. I just saw. I was in England a few years ago, and I was pretty amused by the gin distilleries everywhere. I did a tour with some of my sisters, and there was like Scotland and the Shetland Islands. There was gin everywhere. It was like amazing. I even had a bottle of gin that was made from seaweed, and it was beautiful. They have rhubarb gin and rhubarb and ginger and all sorts. So, as I said, I was a bit embarrassed that New Zealand, which we are we're a small group of islands. We have over 100 gin distilleries. I mean, I don't know how that measures out per person. There's only 5 million people. So doesn't say, it's not a very good advertisement, is it, for New Zealand? But we're very happy about it. So, yeah. One of the big issues that we've had as polios is struggling to have medical providers involved in learning about polio, because any doctor who's in practice now has never seen polio unless they've come from Pakistan or India or somewhere like that. And they don't know what to do, and most of the time they sort of just push us, as we're old, they don't tend to take you seriously, I think. They just think they can, like, if you present with a painful leg, yes, they can see that it's got atrophy and it's weaker and that, but they can only think to fix it with the way they would fix any leg that was weaker, and that they don't consider the polio aspect. So we've put a lot of work into care plans into the medical applications on their computers. I don't know how. I mean, there's quite a bit of difference between America and New Zealand healthcare. And I'm sure it's probably more technical now, but when I lived there, the doctors pretty much did their notes handwriting. New Zealand doctors put everything straight into a computer, and they have clinical pathways in these applications which help them check to make sure they're doing the right, they haven't missed anything. So we've worked quite hard to create a clinical pathway for polio, or post-polio syndrome, as they call it, and things like that. So we've done quite a bit.
Okay, very cool. Well, I have enjoyed our conversation. I want to hear how the gin goes this October, and
Yes.
have you back on for a little brief update on if you were able to get everyone in New Zealand to drink purple gin.
Yeah. I'm trying. I'll do my share.
You'll do your share. Well, thank you, Sue. I appreciate your time today.
No problem.
And thank you for tuning into the Art of Volunteering. Have a great day.